All right then. Up next is me. So I'll make this quick, everyone. Um, well, welcome first of all. Thank you so much for coming to our debate. It means a lot to have so many of you here to listen to us argue the finer points of human nature, because that is what we're arguing tonight: human nature, what it is, who we are, how we're constructed. I will be arguing not simply that humans are not bad, but rather that they are good. And I will be arguing this by putting forward the issue of environment and environmental factors as the key determinant in how humans are, and how this will shroud much of the evidence that the opposition will put forward, before looking at recent experiments which have tried to move beyond environmental factors and really get to the core of uncovering what humans are actually like. So, firstly, this issue of environment. Humans are, before we get to the point of whether they are good or bad, clearly incredibly adaptive creatures. We grew up in a world which was tribal, where we developed our evolutionary instincts, and in doing so, we became, for want of a better word, hypersocial. We adapt to the environment that we are in. This means that we fit into systems, we build ourselves to integrate. So, when we have heard, for example, from Arith, that there were religious systems which conferred a certain amount of good on humans, it was not that humans were simply good or bad. It is more that they are adaptive. It is that they are fitting into the environment where they are. They are not corralled into good by some system which removes their barbaric nature, as Augustine said, that we are born in sin and elevated simply by religious practice. It is rather that humans adapt to the environment that they are in. It is not that they are neither good nor bad. Other great examples of this would be the extent to which humans get drawn into cult-like ways of thinking or can believe extreme things when left in isolation. Humans are capable of being malleable. And that is the importance of environment, that humans change based on where they are, who they're with, etc. So it's not easy to say that humans are good or bad because we are shaped always by environmental factors. And that makes it incredibly hard to judge. So, there have been some recent experiments which have aimed to move beyond environmental factors. A great example of this was a recent study at Yale, which looked into the psychology of babies. Now, babies are humans in perhaps their most innocent of forms before they have been corrupted by the world around them. And what these experiments showed was that humans, and particularly babies, were predisposed towards kindness. When presented with situations where they could choose a malicious or a good option, they consistently chose the good. And what this showcases is that once we step away from examples which the opposition love to use of wars and horrors and religious persecution, etc., we find that these are the horrors of the environment and not the horrors of human nature. When we strip us down to our core, instead of looking at the evils that we can perpetuate when stuck into crueler institutions and a cruel world, indeed, we are good. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Please vote that humans are not bad by nature. Thank you very much for listening. So we have some questions. Ascari, whenever you're ready.
Yeah. You said that wars are caused by the environment. Well, how is that true of World War II? Especially the Holocaust, which is clearly human nature.
I disagree entirely. World War II was a barbaric product of the rise of collectivist ideologies at the start of the 20th century, fueled by economic depression and the loss of World War I. So nationalism, being economically weak, and then this kind of collectivist ideology. These were ingrained in institutions and political parties and systems. And sure, there was a strategic element, but to say that that can be seen as human nature at its core, the fact that this was a once-in-history event should surely perhaps prove otherwise. Of course, there have been atrocities, but they lack consistency. The fact that we mark them as atrocities perhaps should show that we take no pleasure in cruelty. The way that the Holocaust and World War II are remembered as one of the most horrible events in human history shows that we do have a moral compass when we strip away from environments which enable us to be awful. Right, we have some more questions. Zacarlo.
Do you think that antisocial the mental disorder where you're antisocial and do not feel empathy, and how that relates to being passed down genetically, do you think that affects certain smaller societies at a larger rate than other ones? Or do you think that it's pretty much all across the board with humans?
Well, firstly, I think your question raises a very interesting point, that perhaps there is no kind of singular human nature, right? That certain genetic traits and certain kind of makeups predispose certain humans towards more, well, for want of a better word, bad than others. Which I think is a very interesting point. Now, their impact on certain societies more than others. Sure, if you're in a very closed society and there is one kind of dominant genetic group and there is some makeup there which predisposes someone towards cruelty, I'm not sure of the research on this, then I can feasibly see how you would have more problems there than in a society which is larger. Does that answer your question, Zacarlo?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any more questions? There are. Victor, you've PM'd me your question, actually. I have a question. Since the definition, this is from Victor, since the definitions good and bad are entirely subjective, why would be considered true good, as in universal good? If that answer could be found, one could compare it to average, unfiltered, and monitored behavior of people and see what one finds. I have no idea what that means. The last part is kind of another question, sort of as in, would we find more universal good if we observed people than we would universal bad? Okay, that's a clearer to answer question. I.e., if we just observed everyone, would we find more good than bad and calculate? I actually think, Victor, that we'd find more bad, but this gets to my point about systems and environment. We live in systems which coerce people certainly not towards bad, but towards selfish behavior, and that enable people to, particularly in the modern age, to perpetrate cruel actions with anonymity. So I think that we have certain systems in place which predispose people towards bad, but as the research that I mentioned in my speech shows, once you peel back those factors which coerce humans towards bad behavior, we find a purer core. Jekyll, are you ready? Ready when?
Yeah. If nature has no concept of good and bad, in concept, how can human nature be good or bad if nature in itself has no concept of good or bad?
So I think this is a really good point. I think a very reasonable line of argument that you can take in this debate is that morality is imposed, and therefore humans can be neither good nor bad. I don't entirely accept that. I think that while morality is somewhat imposed by humans, we can still judge on certain calculus. So I think some things are objectively good. So certain acts such as charity and selflessness, I'm trying to think of other good examples, generally not harming people and taking actions which benefit others. I think these are objectively good, and you can take a strong line of argument that they aren't. But that would still fall on my side of the debate, that humans are not bad.
Yeah, they are
right?
good.
Yes, because they are therefore not good
I was
or
just
bad.
referring to that. When it comes to nature itself, it has no concept of that.
Yeah, perhaps. Right, thank you very much. That's a good contribution, Jekyll. Right. I'll move on to our next speaker then. Ascari.
Scribblord's just finished typing just this moment.
Okay.
He
Well,
asks,
we'll fit him in.
so this is a question from Scribblord. If we know the human brain grows and changes until well after puberty or into the 20s, couldn't it be argued that using an infant for human nature is akin to judging a caterpillar on the function of a butterfly?
I like the imagery.
Analogy, yeah.
Yes, I think it's very nice. So I think I was only reading the abstract of these pieces, by the way, the research. So they argue essentially that these parts of the brain and the kind of the functions in them are relatively stable. I think that certain things do change in the brain, but I don't know enough about the research to give you a solid answer on that. I know that's a very politician's answer, but I don't know enough to effectively answer your question. It's a really good one, Scrub. Thank you.